Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Say It in Sports, the podcast where we talk about life and leadership lessons through the lens of the games that we love, which are sports. I'm glad that you came back. I am Jen Crompton. I am your host. And today I have a really awesome guest. I mean, I always have awesome guests, but this is a guest who has done some incredible things in her career. So I have Alex Snider with us, and she is a strategist and business maven. And she helps businesses and business leadership really break through some of the challenges that they've encountered and help them scale their businesses to become incredibly successful. Alex has traveled all over the world. She's worked with, like I said, multiple businesses, and she's very successful, but she also shares a passion and love of sports. So Alex, thank you so much for being here today.
Jen, thank you so much for having me. I love the concept of this podcast. You and I have had many conversations about beginning our careers, our lives in sports, and how that's contributed to who we are, what we do, how we do it. And I'm so excited to share with you today. As you said, I work with leaders, executive teams, entrepreneurs to grow and scale businesses. And I do that sort of within my own business, Alex Snider Advisory now. And I have in the past had my own startups, and I have in the past also done a decade in strategy consulting and mergers and acquisitions and operational improvement in the more corporate space, where I worked predominantly in energy and natural resources. So I spent a lot of time in some real remote places on mine sites and infrastructure projects. So I've had a pretty broad range since I completed my MBA in strategy, and I really had a varied career before that with a lot of different things. And a lot of that was to do with figuring out an identity after my athletic career ended. And I think that identity and leadership and business are all very, very similar challenges and opportunities as what we see in sports. And so I'm so excited to talk to you about that today.
Yeah, that's incredible. And, the topic that we're going to be talking about today is really about maintaining that motivation. And, I love that you have kind of tied that into, identity and those things that, it's all a journey, right? So we start someplace and we don't always end up exactly where we thought we were going to end up. But all these different tools and the things that we do really help us travel through that journey most effectively, as long as we kind of stay true to who we are and, what it is that we want to accomplish. So just real quick, I was very impressed when I first met you, just kind of learning about your background and how successful you've been. But I think one of the really cool things about how you work is you really become like a trusted advisor to a lot of these very successful leaders, but a lot of these leaders that kind of get stuck in their own way. And, I think that that's something that really does relate back to sports. And, you and I have discussed how playing sports taught us so many different things that we were able to bring into starting our own businesses and running our own businesses. So I just want to hear a little bit more about, how you got into what it is that you do, like where kind of how you found your space, I guess, right? Kind of being this person, this trusted advisor who has all of this business expertise and helps others kind of break through and really find their thing and whatever it is that helps them, excel their business and their own transformation.
Yeah, I think, hindsight is 2020. You look back and you're like, of course, this is the thing that I do and where I'm at. But on the journey, I think like so many of us, you have the aha moments, but in between, you're just like doing and learning. And I think something that I have come to really understand is a bit also an identity lag, where you see yourself in like a past sense, and you really need to rely on tools and resources to understand where you are today, what you're great at. And for me, I was really shy. So sports was the only place that I was really out there. And even then, I would say I was always a quiet leader, but definitely my leadership style is 1000% based on athletics and being somebody who understands that everyone needs to know their role, everyone needs to understand the play, everybody needs to be included and feel part of the team. And what I didn't understand is, because I just learned it and it was just based on who I was, that you can do that really quietly. You don't have to be a gregarious, like overtly confident appearing human to do that. But I didn't even realize that I was good at those things because I was shy and quiet, because I had this athletic career that came to a bit of an abrupt end due to personal circumstance and had to redefine my identity and I was a massive overachiever. I was so driven and so disciplined from that I worked like crazy, which made me great for consulting, right? Like insecure overachievers, and like, we'll teach you the rest. You're good to go. And I think it wasn't until I had these key inflection points in my progress, such as a partner when I was in consulting in London. I was saying something about being the numbers and not being, a people person. They're like, "Are you kidding me? We have clients who will only sign engagements if you're leading them. Your teams will follow you to the end of the world. The followership that you and the people you're developing within our organization is incredible." And it really pulled me up to realize that I may not have been the traditional archetype, particularly within my fields. Keep in mind, I've come through all male-dominated environments, both in the type of work I was doing and the industries within which I did them. But I did have leadership. I did have all these things. And then I think I had a similar realization when I had left that behind, done some soul searching, sold everything, become nomadic, partnered into a startup, co-founded another. I was just overextending myself again. And overachieving just, and I had, in addition to supporting my business partner with a level of, business support and acumen and coaching, as well as being a co-CEO or a COO, I also was co-working with other founders or other leaders in our, within our community. And on the weekends, they would be like, "Oh, every time we co-work, you always have something that helps me. I know you've saved me a day or a week. You've saved me so much stress, And I didn't realize how much I had synthesized all of this more corporate experience, right-sized it for startups, be able to summarize it, be able to structure in a way that really helped people either who hadn't done something before or had done it but just couldn't, read the label from inside the jar. And I think along with a lot of the personal development that I was on, that was a whole incredible skill set that, again, I was absolutely underrating and not realizing. But other people were like, "Why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing this professionally?" I don't know what the right word is. So I think those aha moments of realizing that I am so driven by impact, right? Like impact is what gets me out of bed in the morning. If I'm not making a difference, I'm not as driven. And I think we're going to talk about the motivation there. But also realizing how much more impact I could have if I were supporting from an advisory role others to achieve, rather than you can only run so many businesses at once. And when you're in it, you're in it. And I think those moments and probably a few others really helped me to understand that I really wanted to shape an organization and an offer where I could provide that knowledge that I had acquired over so many hours and repetitions and experiences, synthesized into something that would really, really help to accelerate and galvanize the growth of organizations and the people within them. And so that's what I did after we had exited our last startup. So my business partner even wanted me to be able to do it while we were within it. But anyone who's in a startup knows it's just, you cannot do that many different things. So within a few months of successfully exiting and being acquired, I was still a vice president for the buyer, but I did kick off Alex Snider Advisory, and I started to structure out the strategic advisory. And then while I went through that with my first few clients and saw their feedback, so much of their feedback was actually on how they had changed as a leader, as a person, how they saw things differently, how they assessed things differently, how their home life was better, how their all of that. And at first I was quite like, no, the metrics, like, what about, and they're like, yeah. Triple the revenue, double the team. This is the done, check. But Alex, like me, I am just in this better place. And that is how I've arrived at what I do today, which is really understanding that for me, strategy and leadership, they just operate hand in hand. You can have the best strategy in the world, But if you don't have the self-awareness and the leadership to, guide other people through it, you're going to have suboptimal results. And the same is true. You could be an incredible leader, but if you're not able to structure out a strategy that acts as the guide rails for the decision making and for the communication to others, then you also will likely not arrive at the full potential.
That makes so much sense. And I love that whole kind of the journey that you just took us through with your career, because like I said, we don't always end up where we thought we would, but wherever we end up, we often can look back and say, oh yeah, okay, I could see how I got here. This makes perfect sense. So two things that I kind of heard you say that I think are really worth kind of talking about a little bit more is impact and change, right? So from the impact perspective, you said, impact is part of your personal motivation. If you wake up in the morning and you know that you can make a difference, then you are ready to get out of bed, right? But if you get up and you're just like, oh, it's just like another day, it could be hard to get out of bed. I've always been the type of person that I get up and I'm ready to go. And I always look at the next day as an opportunity. I've never really had that problem of waking up and not being able to get out of bed like some have. And, and I'm sure that it's for a very similar reason to yours, which is I know if I wake up, I can make an impact. And that for sure motivates me. The other thing that you talked about was change, about the constant change of, where you're going or who you're becoming as a person. So you kind of work through that transformation, which ultimately helps you get to your next step. There's an athlete that I want to point out here because I think you would have quite a bit to say about this. But Sha'Carri Richardson, so she is a female Olympian. She's a sprinter. And in 2020, she was supposed to participate in the Tokyo Olympics. However, she had a positive drug test for marijuana. So, it was a big controversial thing whether or not she was going to be able to participate. She ultimately was not able to participate. But in 2024, she came back. So 4 years later, she came back. Again, she's a sprinter, so think about how much time she's actually out there performing what she does. And she came back as a 24-year-old to the 2024 Olympics and walked away with 2 medals. She had a gold medal and a silver medal. And she had a really great quote. So there were 2 of them. One of them, which is, I'm not back, I'm better. So I appreciated that she said that. So it's not that she came back per se, but it's that she is talking about that ongoing improvement of becoming better at her craft and better at what she does. And the other one was, there's no way I'm not going to leave my best on the track. So even though she did not get the chance to participate the first time, she went back and she worked harder than she ever worked so she could come back into the Olympics and really perform at her best. One of the things that she also said was that she was motivated by representing and inspiring others who face similar challenges or those who identify with her. So I think that her, motivation is very similar in terms of inspiring others, but it is that self-motivation. It's the fact that she just wanted to come back and be better. And I think, when you look at the Olympics, I've never trained for the Olympics. So I know that it seems like a very hard thing that you are training for, 4 years to go out there and run for, 15 seconds or so in your particular race. So, from your experience and kind of what you've been through, both as an athlete and in your business and how you've trained others, what is it that you see these top performers, what are they doing that they're really able to, either find that motivation or harness that motivation and keep it going, even in the low moments or in the moments between, every 4 years going to the Olympics, right? You have a long 4 years to be training. So, what is it that you kind of see and what is it that you teach that really helps them continue to move forward and not, get stuck in that stagnant place or, just get unmotivated and quit?
Well, I think, it's not a coincidence that there are so many slogans and, colloquial expressions around perseverance and grit and determination, right? I think if you look at someone who is a top achiever in anything, right, in sports and in business and in so many other areas, you are looking at somebody who did it one more time, who was willing to try one more time, who's willing to stand up, right? Like fall down 9 times, stand up 10, who's willing to foster the resilience as well, right? Because we are not actually machines. And, if you're thinking from a sports point of view, if you do it wrong and injure yourself badly enough, like at some point there is no coming back. You can, so you have to figure out and understand where to push, where not to push. And I think it's complex. And if we look at sports today in particular, athletes have a myriad of coaches, right? And I think that's very similar to business. You have coaches for each one has a different specialty and they have to work together. And I think that can be taken into business 1,000%, right? So you have a conditioning coach, you have a skills coach, you have a, mindset or psychologist, and I'm shortchanging them. They have like a whole staff. And if you look at a sports team, you have that too, right? You have an owner, a manager, probably a couple coaches, 2 captains, right? And everybody has a different role to play in how that entity, unit, person achieves success. To your point about like, what are people doing? Yeah, I think it's a little bit of the identity I talked about, right? So if we look at Sha'Carri, like she could have, and so many other athletes that have anything, whether it's success that looks easy or success that is clearly marked by, extremely difficult periods, they're willing to define their own narrative, right? They're willing to define. She had the opportunity to say, like, external factors stopped me. But it's that internal locus of control. So internal locus of control, external locus of control, this is happening to me versus like, I will make this happen. I think that is a really, really defining factor of top performers. And I think, again, the willingness to fail and see failure as a lesson and a step as opposed to an outcome, I think that is really fundamental. And I think a lot of that can be learned, right? I don't think that people are innately born being high achievers or not. There are absolutely different factors and people have different strengths, and nature versus nurture is probably a whole other podcast. But we have so many resources at our disposal today with the internet. And I think actually sometimes difficult situations do enable and embed in people a resilience and a willingness or determination to overcome. There's something that I really love about our world today is that so much can be broken down into science. And while I don't think everything should be a formula, there is a book, and if I recall, it's The Art of Impossible, a peak performance primer by Stephen Kotler. And he speaks about how motivation and how, top, people doing the big goals, the crazy things, they actually have been able to break it down into a formula. And I think he has 4 main components, which is motivation, learning, creativity, and flow. And then there's a subset of skills, which is actually where I think it gets interesting. And it's drive, which is very much like the emotional, goals, which is kind of the structure and definition. Like if you don't know what you're trying to achieve, if it's not tangible, it's very hard to know if you're doing the right things. And I do that. That's so much of what I do in business is like define it so you can measure it, so you can take actions. And then grit, which is that ability to persevere. And I'll drop one more book, which is The Comfort Crisis. I don't recall the author's name, so I'll make sure to send it to you for the notes. That is talking about, our ability to do hard things and to do hard things in the face of non-immediate results, which we all, I'm sure if you are on any kind of social media, are hearing about dopamine and short-term attention spans and immediacy and, delayed gratification. If you're going to succeed in sports, if you're going to succeed in business, you are the person who is there when no one is watching. You are the one who is doing it over and over. When, everybody who stands in front of a clapping crowd has spent 10,000 or whatever hours doing it in the dark, doing it when everyone else is sleeping, doing it when no one is cheering them on, and sometimes doing it when people are telling them that what they're doing is ridiculous or silly or a waste of time. And for me, if I was to take a lot of what I've learned from my own experience, working with my clients and the books that I've mentioned, the thing that I think is interesting to play with is curiosity. And because I think curiosity actually flows into a lot of those elements that I just talked about, where One, we've all been there when you end up going down a rabbit hole and you just have all the energy in the world and you're not sleeping and you're just like really curious about something. Now, that something could be something completely useless and you could just be like doom scrolling, or that something could be something really useful. But curiosity is innate to humans. And I think if you can tap into it, and ideally you can, because literally we've all experienced it at some point, I think that you can manufacture it to help you, one, with, learning all of the things you need to learn to excel in a sport or to excel in a business, and which is a lot. You are going to learn and learn and learn, and then you're going to learn how to help other people learn. And two, I think it also could help you with the mindset and resilience, which is the what if. Instead of thinking about whatever your brain is coming up with or whatever other people are telling you, what if is a weirdly powerful statement if you can train yourself to be curious, right? Like, oh God, I have to wake up tomorrow morning, or, oh, I can't do this. Like, those aren't helpful. What if I could? Or what if I tried this? Or what if I just did it one more time? That curiosity, I think, is maybe not the only, but one really, really powerful. And it's something that you can have a conversation with yourself or with others about.
It's like you were in my head because, and maybe this is all the technology algorithms or so, but there was a clip yesterday from Ted Lasso, which is when, I don't know if you've watched it, but when he was throwing the darts and he's talking about curiosity, and he was essentially talking about people bullying him. And he said, but you know what, like the one thing, and I'm totally paraphrasing this whole scene, but he was like, the one thing that all these people had in common who like bullied me and counted me out was they were not curious. They never thought to ask me questions. And this is in the middle of the dart game when he's playing against the soccer team's owner's ex-husband. And he's like, but the one thing, they never did was ask me questions like, hey, Ted, are you good at playing darts, or have you ever played darts before? And then he, goes and throws the dart and he gets a bullseye. So it's this whole concept of, not so much being judgmental, but being curious. And I think curiosity definitely plays into, all of these factors. So what you're saying about, learning things and staying motivated, that definitely comes out of curiosity of, like you said, it's the what if I could do better? What if I tried one more time? And I think it's interesting, another athlete that I like to point out when it comes to motivation is, good old Michael Jordan, because the famous story of him is that he was cut from his high school varsity team, right? And what if he didn't try again, right? But instead he's like, what if I did? I know that I'm passionate about this game. And he loved basketball. I'm sure he still does, but he lived and breathed it. And that was really what motivated him to keep going, was even though he had that setback, he knew that this was something that he was passionate about and something that he loved. And one of his quotes, because I love all the good quotes, is, I failed over and over again in my life, and that's why I succeed. So to your point of, that comfort crisis, and this was one of the things I was going to ask you about is, talking about some of those setbacks, how you maintain your motivation when you are going through, a setback. So when we're talking about Michael Jordan and we say he was cut from his varsity basketball team in high school, good thing he came back, because he won 6 championships with the Chicago Bulls and has a massive empire at this point. Imagine if he didn't try one more time, So that kind of leads to the next part, which is about, talking about setbacks. Like, how do you get through those setbacks, and how does motivation support you to not just give up?
I mean, Michael Jordan is a cultural icon who inspires millions of, children, adults, humans, right? Like, imagine if he had accepted those setbacks and just been like, oh, well, I guess that's it, right? And I don't mean to belittle anyone who has ever given up, because it's easy to do, and in some cases it's the right thing to do. But I guess I'll share with you 2 examples where I think, I'm a believer in like the setback. What is it called? No, the setback before the comeback. I think often terrible with quotes. Yeah. But I think my experience is often things are hardest right before you break into the next level. And I think the identity is a big piece of it. I think the internal versus external locus of control is a big piece of it. And I think, you look at people who excel this way and they're all a little crazy. They're all a little different, and they kind of have to be, because, so I'll give you a kind of a personal-ish example and a business example. So when I was going through my MBA, I came in and I had like all kinds of imposter syndrome. Don't love that term, but everyone knows what it means, so I'm gonna use it. I came in and I had graduated my undergrad early, coming off the back of ending an athletic career, not knowing what the heck I wanted to do with my life. And I had the bare minimum 3 years experience to get into this MBA program, where most people were many years older than me with much more experience. And I came in and I was like, yeah, I want to do this. And, thankfully I had like good experiences and, jibed with the interviewer. Like, I was shocked that I got in. So I got in and I'm like, oh my God, I'm surrounded by these people. And then I go to career services and I'm like, hey, yeah, I want to go into strategy consulting. Like, this is what I want to do. Like, help me make my plan, which is their job. And they looked me in the eye and said, well, strategy consulting and iBanking are the two most difficult industries to get into. So really would recommend that you put more energy into your plan B. Sitting there, and I'm like, and keep in mind, I also was doing this during the housing crisis. So people from the year before still didn't have jobs. Like, it was an interesting time. And they would, send me opportunities for internships. This is like right at the beginning as well. This is like in the first semester, for all kinds of things in industries I had worked in leading up, which were like super aligned to what I had done before, which was not what I wanted to do. I was coming to an MBA because I didn't see a path to naturally progress from what I was doing to what I wanted to do, right? I didn't come to just like get another job in the same direction. I could have done that without 2 years and, taking on debt. So for whatever reason, whatever piece of my identity that is just like, I actually think it was the best thing someone could have said to me. My background, and I've worked on this, but is somebody who like doesn't necessarily thrive on encouragement. I'm kind of like to have to like fight for it.
And I'll show you I can, right?
Like, be really nice to me and I might cry. Hug me. Ooh. But like, be mean? Fine. Got you. Like, I got it. I went on to, I also had quit my job, and this was the first time since I was 12 years old I hadn't had a job, and it was the first time I took on debt. Like, I was yes or yes making this happen. And even if I didn't like believe it inside myself, like behind the disbelief was like, this is happening. There is no option. And I think feeling a little backed up against a wall, again, you have to have the right mindset and personality for it. But I do think that is what a lot of people have in common. Too many options, too many fallbacks can actually be detrimental. And so I went on to take on numerous internal roles, which gave me various opportunities. I went through the processes that were available. I also got in opportunities that were not available by being in the right place, by putting in the extra hours, by being in the conversations. And I actually came out with multiple opportunities, like multiple offers in strategy consulting. I got to choose the company I worked for, which was my company I wanted, my dream company, and I negotiated. So I came out, and then I went on and had an amazing career in strategy consulting and operations, and eventually even M&A, and got asked to come back and speak to students at my alma mater, right? And so that origin story of how I ended up in, okay, not the Olympics, which was a dream from before and something I trained for, but, a very prestigious career, that in a career in which women are unusual and in industries and succeeding and being, I was on partner track by my early 30s. That all started by somebody telling me like, maybe you should think about this. So the other example that's quite similar is in 2019, I was partnered into one startup and had co-founded another. And I was doing strategic planning with a business partner, and I was leading us through, and I was outlining to him, this is kind of what the next stage of growth looks like. This is what we're going to need in order to achieve that. And he looked at me and he said, I don't know if I have another round of this in me, because this business was bootstrapped. We had never taken on investment, consciously made the decision not to, due to the kind of nature of the business, the industry, all the things. and we were fundraising for the other startup. And I said, okay, that's fair. And I outlined to him, there's a lot of different options. One is that we look at ecosystems that could fill the gaps of things that we would need to develop ourselves. And that includes all of these different options. And it also includes potentially joint venture or being acquired. And he was like, you know what? That sounds amazing. I would love a successful exit as a founder. And I would love to be able to build on to what's next in this other opportunity we're building. And I was like, great. And we set all of that up, and we had, a few people get poached and this and that. And we had narrowed down our acquisition opportunities, and we had an acquirer. And I flew back in March of 2020 from Indonesia because I was still living abroad while running these businesses. And I flew back the day before the borders closed for COVID, thinking that I was flying back to run a transaction to sell a business. The world, got chaotic. And we went from we're about to successfully sell our business. In a month, we weren't even sure we had a business. All of our clients were impacted. The whole world was impacted. Everything was impacted. We could have very easily been like, oh my goodness, I don't know, given up or done this or done that. Instead, we doubled down. So our old company's motto was thrive in disruption, because we were using technology to disrupt and all kinds of things. And we just decided that we better live up to that motto. And so we looked at what was happening in the world. We looked at how we could pivot our, technology and our skill sets to serve the immediate needs. We really believed in Anti-Fragile, which is another book, and theory around this is actually an opportunity. This is an opportunity, and we can leverage this opportunity to actually do something even more incredible than what we've already been doing. And long story short, we did. That included picking up great talent on the market who had lost their jobs not due to performance, and who, were willing to grow with us. And we had a really strong mission. My business partner was an incredible person for that component of this is where we're going. You want on this rocket ship or not? This is a reality. We can pay this. In 3 months, we'll assess. In 3 months, we'll assess. I became an expert on all the ways to bring in grants and funding to, support us through this pivot and transition. And long story short, we tripled the company in 10 months and then sold it in April of 2021. So March of 2020, thought we were on top of the world. April of 2020, we weren't sure we were going to have a business anymore. And in April of 2021, we successfully exited the business, and it was approximately 3 times the size of what it had been previous to COVID. Similar story of you can either accept what everyone is thinking and saying, or you can look at where the opportunity is. The hard reality that I think no one loves hearing, if this is something they're struggling with, is that it takes work. It takes seeing the opportunity and recognizing, again, I got to get up one more time than everyone else. I got to put in the hours when everyone is sleeping or out having fun. Okay? Being an athlete growing up was that. I went to university and people were like, you haven't seen all these movies? You haven't seen it? And I was like, no, I was training all the time. I was training. I didn't have a lot of friends. I didn't fit in even with the people I knew. And the funny thing is, when I had that drive, it wasn't so bad. It wasn't so bad not to fit in. I knew I didn't fit in and it kind of hurt, but I wasn't willing to change who I was to fit in. And I was so driven. I was so driven that it overrode everything else. And I think that is where passion is probably the other thing, right? Figure out what's important to you and make a decision. Do you want to be is your identity to be the best? But be the best is competing against yourself as much or more than other people, or do you want a balanced life, right? And so I now, and I don't love the word balance, but now I curate for, a lot of things in my life to be a 7 or an 8 so that I can have business success and health and community. But back then, when I was trying to get on Junior Team Canada, I didn't have that. In my consulting days, when I was achieving things that people said wasn't possible, I didn't have that. And I'm not saying that that's what everyone should do, but if you want an exceptional life and if you want extraordinary results, you have to be willing to do extraordinary things.
Love that. And that's such a good example of I think there's a couple things that were really important in there, which one is having that vision. So it was like the vision of your identity, what it was that you wanted to accomplish, who did you want to become, and then you were willing to make those sacrifices to reach that goal because you had that vision. And you had said that before about setting goals, right? You need to understand where you want to go to be able to get there. So like if your goal is to, be an Olympic athlete, then you set up your training plan, you set up, your life to be set up so you can do that. So you can optimize your time to help you reach your goal. And then when you are encountered with those situations where you have to make that decision between, going out to watch the latest movie or staying in because you have to train early the next day, you have to make that choice. And that choice can only be made by you. Your coach can tell you that you have to be there. Your coach can drive to your house to pick you up. But if you don't get in the car, you don't put in the time when you got there, then you're not going to be successful. And that all comes back to, like you said, your vision. If that's what you want to accomplish, you've got to keep that at the forefront. And that's what will get you through, some of the times when you don't feel like you fit in, or you feel like, why am I doing this? I'm missing out on X, Y, and Z. Well, that's because ABC is really where you want to go, so you kind of have to like harness that and remember that that's why you are who you are. And that's where you want to be going, who you want to become, I guess.
And it's, I was getting up at 3:30 in the morning in my teen years when everyone's doing other things to go to competitions, and I'm getting up and training, and I'm working a job to help pay for it. And, I'm doing all those things. The thing that I think also I have learned is you also have to then figure out what is that. That also means like you got to sleep, right? It's not just getting up. It's like, what do you need to be doing? And in my later life, when I left consulting, I read a lot about sleep. And then I looked back, I was still competing, but just in like recreational. But I remember there were periods where I was like objectively in the best shape of my life. Like I looked chiseled, I was training, but my performance wasn't great. And I was injured constantly. Yeah, I was massively underslept, stressed out, under-resourced. So the training didn't translate to performance and my body couldn't heal. So I think when I think about identity, and I'm going to name drop one last book because Atomic Habits is fundamentally one of the best books for understanding. It's just told similar to some of the other books in a story with a ton of facts and science behind it. So really digestible and enjoyable. Identity is, I am a person that does X, right? Like it can be like, I'm an Olympic athlete, but really what you need is, I'm an Olympic athlete. An Olympic athlete does these things. And therefore those are the things that I do. And I have had that identity crisis a few times in my life. And sometimes I'm like, don't put all your eggs in one basket. I thought I learned that when I left athletics. I went and did the same thing in consulting. I was like so wrapped up in it. But again, I achieved things that other people were like, wow, because I was, unbalanced in that way. But I love the concept that I am somebody who, does these things. And I remember, around the time that we sold the company, I had been so all in on, growing our company through the pandemic. I was also supporting, people and things in my personal life. And I had actually tweaked an old injury right before flying back to Canada, right before the borders closed. And I spent a year grinding and working and not handling the other components of like personal and physical. I thought I was, but I couldn't heal. I spent a year in chronic pain. And I got to a point right after we sold the business where I checked in with myself and I was like, I'm in chronic pain. I basically can't work out. Some days I can't bend down and tie my shoe. I am not healthy. And by other people's standards, maybe I was, but this is where the crux of the point comes in. By my identity as an athlete, as somebody who is physically strong, as somebody who leads a healthy lifestyle, there is this cognitive dissonance between the reality and my identity. And it is very uncomfortable. And that is what identity will give you. It will give you that discomfort. And the choice I had to make was either update my identity to reflect my reality or take actions that are aligned to return my reality in alignment with my identity. And that's what I did, right? I hired a personal trainer. I actually made can't remember what it was, but basically an agreement with a friend who was in a similar situation because I actually couldn't get a trainer for the next month or two until things changed. but I made like a pact, an accountability pact. And it had consequences, financial consequences. And I made this pact and I started to create the actions every day and the accountability and the alignment. And then I literally paid somebody to help me overcome my injuries and restructure my training. And then I invested in all kinds of other things to become the person that I believed I was, and to return that alignment and get rid of that cognitive dissonance, which is actually really exhausting. I don't want to get too psychological terminology, but that is the power of identity. And I remember having this conversation with myself almost 5 years ago now. And that has guided my life for the last 5 years. And that is what has allowed me to build the business I have, to make the decisions I've made, to overcome some very difficult personal circumstances, build community, and be at the healthiest and fittest that I've ever been in my life.
Yeah, I love that. And I think, a couple things that you said in there too, that kind of went back to other things that you had mentioned, which, I think one thing I want to say before I forget, which is nothing is lost in the journey. And I think that's really important. And you've exemplified that with the story that you shared, which is, even though you were training for the Olympics, but that didn't necessarily work for you in terms of like reaching that ultimate goal, you pivoted and you changed what that goal was going to be. But all the things that you learned throughout that training, you were able to use those and help them with your next phase and the next goal that you wanted to get to. And that also is one of the things you said in there too, is about hiring coaches or just, having people in your support system who can help you through all the challenges that you might have. So, that is actually something I started doing this year, was hiring other coaches to help me with different aspects of my life, based off of, very similar to what you were saying, figuring out exactly who I am and what I want my identity to be. And I think that's like one of the most exciting things to think about, is that, when you got to this point that you are confident enough in yourself, you realize that you do have the power to determine who it is you are, right? You can you can build that identity based off of your vision. And that's what you do. You just figure out what that is. And then you find the resources, the people, the experiences, the things that are going to help you get there. And then again, nothing is necessarily lost through that journey of transformation, because everything that you learn along the way feeds into your pool of experiences that makes you who you are today. All the yesterdays equal your today, which I think is awesome. So, so just one last thing I want to ask, we're going to wrap up in just a second, which is just, what is one piece of advice? So like, if you were to kind of drill this down, what is one piece of advice that you would offer someone who, may be looking for some additional motivation to kind of help them be their best, or, someone who maybe is going through one of those challenges and maybe doesn't see the opportunity right now? What would you say to them?
I want to link it to what you just said, actually, about that like journey and, change and choosing your identity. I think so many times things are ephemeral and big and they seem insurmountable, and you do get to choose. And if you look at the arc, I said you go from, an amateur athlete, recreational, to a pro athlete, then often you'll have all these coaches around you and they're helping you achieve. And then maybe you become a coach yourself, and then a manager. And business is very similar. You have to evolve from doing to enabling others. And all of that, I think, whatever it is you want to achieve, one is make the space to just dream big, right? Art of the possible. If let go of all the constraints and like, what do you really want? And then you don't have to make, as much as like I love a plan and I help people make really big plans, like you don't need 52 steps. What is the first smallest step that you could take in the direction of what you want, right? It's great if you can think of the next 3 to 5 steps, but break it down into the smallest tangible thing. And if you go to Atomic Habits, they'll talk about that, which is like, put your gym shoes on. You don't have to go to the gym, just get your gym shoes on, right? Like break it down to something manageable, because our brains are wonderful, but they can be terrible. They can hold and contain and think so many thoughts at one time. Break it down into tangible, implementable, and small, and then build. And that's where things, you can then extrapolate that into what you mentioned, which is skill stacking, right? I'm good at this. I want to go there. Okay, well, I need to be also good at this. Then I need to be good at this. And if you can get some core skills and some unique skills and stack them in a unique way, you will be able to achieve things others cannot, whether that's in sports or business or anything else.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Alex. I think this was so great, and you've offered such great advice and good tips. And always love hearing about your journey. There's all different parts of it. You pull thread, and everything starts to unravel in the best of ways, because we can all learn from you, which is awesome. So, thanks again for being here. I appreciate it. Where can people find you? What is your website?
My website's easy. It's alexsnider.com. I'm Alex Snider on LinkedIn and pretty much every other platform, YouTube, etc. Podcast is Builders with Alex Snider. So pretty easy to find. And Jen, thank you so much for today's conversation. It was an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, I'm like I said, so glad to have you. And, I'm sure we will hear from you again soon, and I'll put all your links in the description. So if anyone wants to reach out to Alex, feel free to do so. And we will see you next time. Thanks.